here's what could happen, right? This is what potentially worries me. The price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin. Now, people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside. They may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. And maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? Mm-hmm. They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? If MicroStrategy gets too big, I could potentially see a danger on the way down.
Fred Krueger warns that if Michael Saylor's aggressive Bitcoin strategy fails, it could trigger panic and a massive sell-off. With high leverage and debt, a bear market could force MSTR investors to dump shares, causing Bitcoin's value to plummet, not due to its fundamentals, but from fear of forced liquidations. Stick around as Krueger explains the risks and what's next for the market.
But if the price drops, you have to put more Bitcoin up, right?
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, you have to repay the loan. You know, those are your choices. I'm just saying, all of a sudden you can get into a world of pain, right?
Yeah.
With these, you know. Now, again, when does that happen? That happens in a bear market. In a bear market, do you really like having $5 billion of debt in a bear market? No, that's usually what kind of destroys you. When we do have the next bear market, and I don't know what will drive it. I don't know. I don't especially know if we can predict when it's going to be, right? And but I think in that bear market, what are people going to sell first? MSTR or the Bitcoin that they have in cold storage?
MSTR.
Right. They're going to sell MSTR, right? So if they're sitting on MSTR and MSTR is trading in a multiple of 3 or 4 or even 2, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to get rid of this first, right? It's like it's run by Saylor. He might get some liquidated. He might have some margin calls, whatever. You know, if I got my Bitcoin in cold storage, well, that I know. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Great. Like if we get into a complete bear market, right? There's not going to be any new convertible bond offerings. There won't. Those things will be on ice, okay? And do you think they're going to be selling more stock? No, they will not. They will not be selling stock at 1 times multiple or 0.9 times a multiple. Here's the problem there, okay? They could sell bonds. Yes, they could sell bonds similar to the bonds that they sold their first batch of bonds, right? If you remember, those bonds were at a 9% yield or so, 6% yield initially.
This was in 2020.
They would be in, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those were like actual Bitcoin-backed bonds. They actually had to segment out, say this Bitcoin is going to be used as collateral for those bonds, right? Very, very tricky, which is one of the reasons they quickly paid off those bonds, right? They did not want to have that stuff sitting on their balance sheet. Would they do that? Yes, they could do that, right? They could definitely say, listen, we got all this Bitcoin. We're not going to sell this Bitcoin, right? But we're going to take, I don't know, let's take 100,000 Bitcoin that they have, right? And then we're going to pledge that Bitcoin and we're going to borrow some money against that Bitcoin, right? And what would the interest rate there be? Would it be 1%? Absolutely not. Okay. That Bitcoin is going to, that loan is going to be a 6% loan. Okay. It will, you know, I mean, in today's environment, it'd be a 9% loan, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm just saying, and it would be collateralized by the Bitcoin. So are they going to issue a convertible bond? Nope. They're not going to do it. If their stock is trading and we're in the depths of a bear market, they're not issuing convertible bonds. They're issuing bonds against Bitcoin, high coupon. They're going to tie up Bitcoin, and everybody's going to start worrying about those bonds, you know, triggering some redemption clause, right? What they can say is that they need to have a certain amount of collateral, otherwise they need to sell, right? They sort of say, this loan is backed by these Bitcoin. This is what potentially worries me is we add so much convertible debt to this thing. Let's suppose we get to $30 billion of convertible debt. Okay. Let's say, right? And now all of a sudden we hit a really bad bear market. Now people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system.
Okay.
And they're going to start, the price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside.
Despite a $670 million loss in Q4 2024, Strategy stock has surged 370% in the past year, with analysts predicting potential inclusion in the S&P 500. The company now holds 478,000 BTC worth over $46 billion, adding 28,320 Bitcoin in 2024. To fund more purchases, it launched a $2 billion debt offering with 0% interest, doubling down on Bitcoin despite price volatility. Major institutions are closely monitoring Strategy's bold decisions, keeping the market on edge. Now, let's hear from Fred Krueger for further insights.
Does that mean it's a systemic danger long-term for Bitcoin? No, but it just could mean we get into a really bad bear market for Bitcoin. Yeah. And one of the casualties of that bear market might be MSTR, right? It might be, right? Like, so there's definitely some scenario where MSTR goes bust. Okay, in my opinion, that's not zero, right? The way. So I don't think it's going to be, again, none of this stuff's catastrophic for Bitcoin. And, 20 years from now,
everything is good for Bitcoin. At the end of the day, if MicroStrategy...
Ultimately, it's all good for Bitcoin. But I'm just saying, I just think if you are looking at this thing from a personal point of view, I really think there's two ways you can look at this. First of all is you're one of the many people in the world who can't buy Bitcoin. Okay, and I put a tweet out today because I just was like, okay, if you can't buy Bitcoin, but you can buy MSTR, raise your hand. And I had people like, well, I live in Norway. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in the UK. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Saudi Arabia. I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Sweden. I can't buy Bitcoin, I'm a client of Vanguard. I can't buy Bitcoin. So there's all these people out there who just can't buy the ETF, right? And many people in Europe, they just can't even buy physical Bitcoin. It's just like too hard, right? So there's a whole class of people for which, if they want exposure to this general asset class, MSTR is one of very few ways that they can easily participate, right? If you're in the UK and your main source of money is in your pension fund or something, and the only way to have access to this is to buy MSTR, right? That's your only choice, right? You're in a different category than Rajat sitting in Toronto, and you can buy actual Bitcoin if you want. So I think that there are sort of two kinds of people. One is people just can't buy anything else and have to buy MSTR. They're sort of trapped into liking it or not. Now, whether it's an asset that delivers more Bitcoin every year, it has a Bitcoin yield, I get all that, right? Yeah. But that's one class of people. The other class of people is people who have Bitcoin and, they may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. Maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? I was one of those guys, right? Yeah. I bought calls on MSTR. I did really well with my calls on MSTR, okay? But do I see a massive need to buy MSTR at 3 times the amount of Bitcoin, even if they're producing a Bitcoin yield? No, I don't. If you look at the log price of Bitcoin, right, the log of Bitcoin price, and you average the logs over 4 years, you'll see that that's just a complete straight line, right? So, I think that the chance of us deviating from that behavior in the next 4 years is very low, right? I don't think if something fits a straight line with 99% R squared, that you're going to see that line break in 4 years.
Strategy's approach has made it a popular investment for those unable to buy Bitcoin directly, but this reliance comes with significant risks. If Bitcoin enters a harsh bear market, MSTR could be one of the biggest victims. However, despite these risks, Bitcoin's long-term growth remains steady, as Kruger highlights, with data showing consistent growth driven by supply dynamics and increasing adoption. While Strategy might falter, Bitcoin continues to advance. Those who weather the storm will be the ones holding the real asset, not depending on others' leverage. If you want to stay ahead in the unpredictable world of cryptocurrency, make sure to subscribe to the eMillionaire Blueprint YouTube channel. Get expert insights and stay informed so you can make smarter investment decisions. Don't miss out. Subscribe now.